Chief Jibola Aosheyi, you are welcome, sir. Professor Tunji Olaopa, you are welcome. That's the chairman of the Nigerian Civil Service Commission. Other members of the Governing Council, our distinguished convocation lecturer for today, Professor Tunde Babawale. Let's appreciate him. He has been here since 2 p.m. Thank you, sir. You are welcome. The Registrar of Lee City University, Dr. Mrs. Oyebola Ayeni. University Bossa will soon join us. Deputy Vice Chancellor, Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Molara Campbell. The Provost of PG College, all Deans of Faculties, all Head of Department, Deputy Registrars, our graduating students, esteemed students, invited guests, alumni, friends of this great university, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 18th Convocation Lecture of Lee City University, Ibadan. This Convocation Lecture is a central highlight of our 18th Convocation ceremony, made even more memorable as it coincides with the 20th anniversary of our university. It's a celebration of 2 decades of growth, vision, and academic excellence. Convocation is always a moment of pride, a time when we celebrate the achievement of our students, we honor the dedication of faculty, and reaffirm the values that define us as an institution. Today we have the privilege of hosting an eminent scholar, a renowned public intellectual, and a respected public servant, Professor Tunde Babawale, former Provost of National Anti-Corruption Academy, the training arm of Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offenses Commission in Abuja. His distinguished career in political economy, public policy, governance, and anti-corruption advocacy places him at the intersection of scholarship and national service. Prof, we are honored to have you here, sir. The theme of today's lecture is democracy and its future in Nigeria, constraint and prospect. This topic is timely, compelling, and critically important because at this period when Nigeria continues to grapple with questions of democratic consolidation, electoral credibility, and institutional accountability, youth disengagement, and economic pressure. I believe our guest lecturer is going to give us an insight into this topic. As a university, we recognize our responsibility in the national project. Lee City University is committed to training graduates who are not only competent professionals, but responsible citizens, men and women who will uphold integrity, justice, equity, and democratic values. Education remains the lifeblood of democracy. Without enlightened citizens, democracy cannot flourish. Over the past year, Lee City University has recorded noteworthy achievement across research, innovation, international partnership, and academic development. These efforts are part of our commitment to shaping a generation of graduates who can make meaningful contributions to Nigeria's future politically, economically, and socially. We are deeply honored to have Professor Tunde Babawale as our convocation lecturer. His scholarship, experience, and commitment to democratic ideas make him uniquely suited to guide us through this conversation. We look forward to his insight, which I'm confident will challenge us, inspire us, and perhaps even unsettle us, for that is the true purpose of scholarship. As we listen to today's lecture, let us not be a passive spectator, but as active participants in the democratic project. Let us live here with renewed conviction that democracy in Nigeria can thrive if we nurture it, defend it, and demand that it serve the people. On behalf of the Chancellor, the Pro-Chancellor, and Chairman of Council, I thank you all for being part of this historic occasion. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I hereby declare the convocation lecture open. Thank you.
Please, may I request Professor Gabriel Olatunde Babawale to be on his feet. Gabriel Olatunde Babawale is a professor of political economy in the Department of Political Science at the University of Lagos, born on the 4th of October 1961 in Inisha, Odo-Otin, local government, Osun State. He began his education at Initial Grammar School, Initial between 1973 and 1977, before attending the University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, from 1977 to 1985. There, he earned both undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, receiving 2 prestigious academic honors, notably University of Ife Scholarship and the Departmental Award for the best overall graduate performance in the Department of International Relations during the 1983-1984 academic session. His teaching and research career started during his National Youth Service at the Government Secondary School, Numa in Adamawa State. That was in 1981 to 1982. He later joined the Adeyemi College of Education campus of the then University of Ife, now Obafemi Awolowo University, as an assistant lecturer in 1985, and moved to the University of Lagos in 1991 as a lecturer grade 1, where he rose to the rank of Professor of Political Economy in 2002. Recognized for his excellence in teaching, he was voted the best lecturer in the Department of Political Science at the University of Lagos in the 2003-2004 academic session. Professor Tunde Babawale also served as the founding managing editor of the Unilag Journal of Politics until 2006. In the course of his academic career, he has consulted for numerous organizations, including UNESCO, the African Union, and the Ford Foundation. His administrative contributions at the University of Lagos include serving as Secretary of ASU between 1993 and 1996, Assistant Dean of Student Affairs between 1998 and 2000, and Dean of Student Affairs 2014 to 2016. He has also chaired key university committees, such as the Ford Foundation Grant Committee between 2002 and 2006, and the Intellectual Nodal Contact Committee 2005 to 2006, a committee set up by the Vice Chancellor to enhance the implementation of the university's strategic plan. As an accomplished scholar, Professor Tunde Babawale has published over 131 academic papers, 21 books, and 7 monographs. He is a member of several academic associations, including the Nigerian Political Science Association, the Historical Society of Nigeria, and the Third World Forum. In 2006, he was appointed Director General of the Center for Black and African Arts and Civilization, where he revitalized the institution into a globally recognized cultural agency. Under his leadership, Center for Black and African Arts and Civilization hosted 8 international conferences and strengthened Nigeria-Brazil relations through a cultural MOU signed in 2010. His later public service roles included membership of the Administrative Visitation Panel to Adekunle Ajasin University in 2009, appointment as Electoral Commission for Lagos State Independent Electoral Commission in 2017, and until recently, Provost of the Anti-Corruption Academy of Nigeria, the training and research arm of the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offenses Commission, ICPC. Professor Tunde Babawale's exceptional service has earned him numerous awards, such as the Dr. Kwame Nkrumah Outstanding Leadership Merit Award in 2008, the OAU Alumni Excellence in Public Service Award 2010, and the Distinguished Public Service Award from the University of Texas at Austin in 2012. Is married with children. May I request, with standing ovation, to welcome Professor Gabriel Olatunde Babawale.
Please, you can have your seat, Sir Zamas. I want to start by thanking the authorities of the City University for the invitation extended to me to be the guest lecturer for this year's convocation lecture. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be assigned this responsibility, and I really want to thank you for it. I would also want to say that a protocol has been established, which I am going to adopt, but as it is customary, it is also important for us to give honor to whom honor is due. I have in my front here my senior colleagues and colleagues. I can see Professor Alade Komo, I can see Chiva Osheyi, I can see Professor Olaokwa here, I can see Madam Mrs. Oweye. We were in Ife together about the same time, if you recall. So it's a kind of homecoming for me to be here this afternoon, and I consider it a privilege. I'd like to start by saying that as the title goes, how many minutes do I have, Chairman? Okay, 45. That's all right. I also breach protocol by not recognizing the chairman and the principal officers of the university, the vice chancellor, the registrar, and the deputy vice chancellor. I thank you very much. So as I said, the topic of the lecture today is democracy and its future in Nigeria, the constraints and the prospects. Now, what I want to do here is not to denigrate or discredit Nigerian democracy. I will also pause to welcome the big masquerade, the chairman of council, my senior in this business, Professor Jide Oweye. You are welcome, sir. As I said, I am going to talk about democracy and the constraints as well as the prospects of democracy in Nigeria. But we are all fairly familiar with the state of democracy in this country. My lecture I have divided into about 7 parts. I'm going to start with an introduction. I am going to proceed from there to talk about the conceptual and the theoretical framework for my lecture. I'm also going to talk about the constraints to democracy in Nigeria, as well as talk about the lessons from other lands or other nations. I move from there to talk about the prospects for the future of democracy in Nigeria, and then proceed again to look at how we can entrench democracy, and I titled it, The Requisite Normative Behaviors for Sustaining Democracy in Nigeria. And then I conclude and make my recommendations. As I was saying, Nigeria's democracy stands at what I describe as a defining crossroads. It's experienced some very persistent structural weaknesses, what I also call endemic corruption, ethno-religious polarization, electoral malpractices, and insecurity. All of this continue to challenge the resilience of democratic governance in the country. Yet, we must not take away the fact that Nigeria's democracy is also characterized by a very vibrant civil society, by the dedication of some reform-minded institutions, and also the potential, we have the potential to have an engaged citizenry. All of these offer what I call a foundation of hope. Having said that, I'd like to say that what I'm trying to do in this paper is to look at the state of democracy in our country. I would also try to identify the systems and operational constraints that confront us or confront our democratic experience. I want to explore the prospects for sustenance and consolidation, as well as examining the views of scholars and what other countries have experienced about democracy that we can share. And of course, I conclude that there is need for us to have normative behavior that can help in entrenching democracy or democratic culture. I also call for some institutional reforms, some moral regeneration, some transformative leadership to come into place, and then enforce leadership accountability. In the introduction, I tried to trace the history of democracy in Nigeria. That is what I call our democratic journey, from the period immediately after independence, the oscillating between civilian and military rule at various points in our history. I talked about the First Republic under the leadership of the then Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa, the Second Republic under the then Alhaji Shehu Shagari, and then with the military interregnum led by the late General Muhammad Buhari. And then, of course, that followed up with the elections of 1993, presumed to have been won by Chief M.K. Abiola, now almost confirmed to have been won by him, and his death in the hands of the state, which pushed us again to some crisis that also gave birth to an interim government. And that interim government in 1993 was removed from power by General Abacha. I think that was November. And then Abacha himself died in 1998. And then we had a new civilian dispensation coming in 1999 after the General Abdusalami Abubakar military regime. So this marked the beginning of our current democratic dispensation. This particular era has provided us with renewed hope for participatory governance and inclusive leadership. Yet, in spite of the fact that we have had over 2 decades of democratic experience, our country still grapples at the moment with governance deficits, institutional fragility, and indeed what I have called systemic decay and public disillusionment. This disillusionment came about because people feel that democracy is not delivering on its promises. The problem is that in a society where people take it for granted that democracy will always deliver on its promises without vigilance, they end up being disappointed. So that is the first lesson I want us to learn, that we must not always assume that democracy will deliver on its promises, except we exercise what I call vigilance. So what is democracy? Of course, generally, the commonest definition is democracy being the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. However, we have had so many other definitions. What is important is that democracy talks about political egalitarianism as well as popular participation, and also talks about the involvement of civil society or the protection of civil liberties. I'm talking about everybody being involved in the process. The origin, the historical origin of democracy is about the participation of the people in governments. And that has been the characteristic that defines it. So where democracy departs from this, and what are these things, these characteristics? From political egalitarianism, from popular participation, and from respect for civil liberties, then there is a problem. Again, it is a system that approximates also good governance. That's the expectation. Because both democracy and good governance can be mutually reinforcing. Where you have democracy, you are likely to have good governance if it is properly practiced. And when you have good governance, there is likely to be democracy. And why have we said that? We have said that because some of the things that characterize or that exemplify or reflect good governance are also things that you can credit democracy for having, which includes something like predictability in government behavior, freedom of the press, decentralization of power and decision-making, and a lot of others. Having said that, what this presentation tries to do, as I said, is to look at the constraints and the prospects of democracy in Nigeria, drawing from our local realities and also global comparative experiences. In spite of the state of gloom that people experience in terms of the experience of democracy now, there is still hope. There is a silver lining behind the dark cloud. That silver lining I will also explain as we progress. Again, I think one of the most important things that we need to make, to the point that I have to make here, is that there are emerging prospects that we can have a Nigeria that can experience a democratic renewal if certain things are in place. And what are those things? First, we need what I call transformative reforms. Secondly, I think we need a normative order, a new normative order. And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about the fact that when you have a system of governance, it has to be accompanied by appropriate behavioral tendencies on the part of the people of that society to keep that system going. It is often said that you cannot have democracy without democrats. And for you to have democrats, people must exhibit democratic behavior and exhibit democratic attitude. Where people don't show democratic attitude, you are not likely to have democracy. I'd observed it elsewhere that sustainability of democracy depends not only on the existence of formal institutions. And what are these formal institutions? The executive, the legislature, the judiciary, but also the internalization of social norms. That is what I describe as the generally accepted and expected behavior that promotes civic discipline, mutual respect, accountability among citizens and leaders alike. Without these foundational civic norms, democracy will be nothing but an empty shell. Indeed, it will gravitate to what I call a dissolving mirage. Because that democratic experience, without this characteristic behavior on the part of the people, would only be vulnerable to manipulation, to corruption, to public apathy, to undermining the very spirit of participatory governance, which democracy is all about. And in trying to explain what I'm trying to say here, I make allusions to two theoretical frameworks. Institutionalism, which talks about what are the structures that are in existence, what are the institutions that are in existence that can enhance the democratic experience. And the second one has to do with the political culture, because the political culture, as I said, involves the behavior of people and how this behavior affects their attitude toward democracy, and how that in itself affects the practice of democracy in the country. Indeed, I'm saying here, I'm putting this position across, that in any democratic setting, you must critically find out whether that democracy is of a procedural type or of a substantive type. I'm distinguishing between procedural democracy and substantive democracy. What I mean by procedural democracy is just democracy that largely emphasizes the ritual of elections without corresponding improvement in governance, without transparency, without social equity. So you can have the infrastructures of democracy, what I also would call the software of democracy without having the hardware. And what do I take to be the hardware of democracy? Those practices and values encompassing popular participation, accountability, equality, and liberty. All of these constitute the real normative anchors of democracy in any society. Where this is meeting and there is a gap between form and substance, what you end up having is what I've called defective democracy. And what is defective democracy? That is a type of democracy where democratic institutions exist in form, but not in substance or in function. They are weakened by corruption. They are weakened by impunity. They are also weakened by the erosion of civic trust. So my own observation of the Nigerian experience is that while Nigeria continues to hold periodic elections, our democracy still struggles to deliver the substantive dividends of participation, the substantive dividends of justice, the substantive dividends of accountability, and of course, the what could lead us to democratic consolidation. So what is the situation with Nigeria from what I've said? Recall I did say that we must distinguish between what I call procedural democracy and substantive democracy. The truth is that there is a disjuncture, from my experience, between the institutional imperatives and the infrastructures of democracy, such as multi-partyism, when you have more than one political party, multi-partyism, competitive election, election monitoring, periodic elections, all of these are there as infrastructures of democracy. The problem here lies in the disproportionate focus. Please, I want us to take note of this. There is a proportionate focus on the infrastructural aspect at the expense of the substantive and other critical aspects of democracy, such as respect for civil liberties, inclusivity, justice, and accountability. And I invoke the words of late Claude Ake to make this point. Because Ake asserted that what we have had foisted on Africa is a version of liberal democracy that is reduced to the crude simplicity of multi-party elections. He goes further to say that this type of democracy is not in the least emancipatory because it offers the people rights they cannot exercise. It gives them the opportunity to vote without choosing. And freedom, which is patently spurious, and political equality, which disguises what he calls unequal power relations. So what am I trying to say here? That the problem of our democratic experience here has to also be traced to the kind of state structure that we have. The Nigerian state, as we all know historically, is a neo-colonial one. A state that has its origin in colonialism. And all the weaknesses of the colonial state, the repression, lack of responsiveness to the feeling of the people, all of this, predatory orientation, and all of it are also emblematic in the state as we have it at the moment. What then is my contention here? I want us to focus on the moral and civic dimension of democracy. And what do we need to do? There is a need for our democracy to have an ethical grounding. For democracy to thrive, there is need for institutional efficiency. Yes, we have institutions in our democracy, but how efficient are they? How do these institutions perform? When you have a court case and you take it to court, it takes years and years for you to get a judgment. That's not efficiency. Look at what happened to the case of Nnamdi Kanu and compare it to the case of Ekpa. Ekpa, the guy in Finland, his case lasted less than a year. We have spent almost 10 years on Nnamdi Kanu's case before it was resolved. That is not efficiency. So we need very efficient institutions. We also need what I call value reorientation. And I'm going to come to that shortly. Because the behavioral sciences tell us that the way people behave affects how they run their systems and their reaction to that system as well. So, and I believe that the attitude of people to democracy will count in determining whether the democracy will be strong or weak. For me, democracy requires both institutional efficiency, which I've alluded to, and a new value reorientation that promotes tolerance, dialogue, and of course, political patriotism. I'm going to also talk about that later. Now, I talked about institutionalism, which I said talks about the strength, integrity, and autonomy of the formal structures that are used to support democracy, such as the judiciary, the legislature, and all of it. And then the electoral bodies, all of which shape democratic stability. But political culture is also important because it emphasizes the role of citizens. What role do they believe, their preferences, their values, what do that, and their behavioral orientation, what role do those things play in sustaining democracy? We must ask ourselves the question, what role does our own behavior, our attitude, our values, what role do they play in helping us to sustain democracy? This is very critical. As I said before, you cannot have democracy in a context where you don't have people with democratic attitudes or where you don't have Democrats. All of these are very, very important. So within the framework that I have just mentioned, that is the political culture theory and the institutionalism that I alluded to, I extend the argument by highlighting the significance of social norms. That in every society, there are certain norms that take root, which help a particular type of system to develop or not. And what do we mean by norms? We are talking about those values that are associated with a group of people or a particular society. It's unwritten rule, they are informal rules, but they become entrenched and they become accepted, and also people practice such behavior. Now, in Nigeria's case, both institutional weakness and a deficient political culture marked by low civic trust, clientelism, and weak adherence to democratic norms have jointly undermined the prospect for a resilient and participatory democracy. So the interplay between fragile institutions and the erosion of normative civic behavior remains central to understanding the constraints to Nigeria's democratic development. In other words, the interaction of all these problems, these constraints, seem to be the thing that has been holding down our democracy. So what are the other things? Systemic and structural problem. I've talked about the weakness of the institutions. I've talked about the behavioral problem. But again, the nature of our constitution is also a very key problem that confronts our democracy. What is wrong with our constitution? Many say it does not reflect the wish of the people. In fact, lawyers will always tell you that it lies about itself when it opens the page, the first page of the Constitution, as we, with the phrase, we the people. And that the people had no say. It was the Abdusalam Abubakar regime that put it together and then christened it. It was even a decree, actually. I think Decree 24, which now got transformed or transmuted into the 1999 Constitution. So what are the problems? First, you know that the problem with the Constitution is that it's unitary in orientation. Unitary because it was brought by the military, if you know. Of course, they want to do everything in their own image. God created man in his own image. The military created the Nigerian Constitution in his own image. So it explains the unity orientation. You know, they have a hierarchical command structure, and that affects their own conception of what governance is all about. Command and obey. The second point, apart from the unity orientation, is that it has an inbuilt system of centralizing power and resources. Although we claim to be practicing federalism, but what you have is the centralization of power and resources within a federal structure where those powers and resources should have been decentralized. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense to you. Again, you will see that part of the weakness of the 1999 Constitution, it reduces the state and local government autonomy, which is an essential part of a democratic country. You should have decentralization of powers, but this is lacking. Even the effort of the current administration with President Tinubu's announcement that local government resources or allocations should go to them directly, every effort is being made to frustrate the implementation of that particular directive. Another major obstacle is that our system is characterized by what I call electoral manipulation and political violence, which continue to taint Nigeria's democratic process. We also have, like I said, in spite of advancement in technology, which you can credit INEC for. INEC has done a lot, especially with my bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS. But in spite of that, rigging persists. Not only does rigging persist, violence still persists in the electoral system. And the other negativity that characterizes our electoral system now is what I've called the over-judicialization of the electoral process. Over-judicialization of the electoral process. Every little case, there is no other democracy in the world where you have so many litigations after elections. Nigeria is an exception. And that shows that there is trouble with the system that we operate. Again, we are confronted with the problem of ethno-religious polarization, mismanagement of our diversity, as well as political campaigns that magnify the fault lines among our people. Instead of trying to use that to unite us, politicians use that to divide us. This added to security challenges reflected in terrorism, banditry, kidnapping, separatist agitations. All of this have not only destabilized communities, but have also eroded public confidence in the state's capacity to protect lives and property. Even the Department of State Services, DSS, in 2021, warns that persistent insecurity will continue to fuel voter apathy. It will continue to constrain political participation and provide a pretext for authoritarian tendencies. These are problems that confront us at the moment and make public confidence in the electoral system to be waning. We need to restore that confidence. Again, since the First Republic, the state in Nigeria has been more of a predatory system that have been used for accumulation of wealth by the ruling elite rather than the promotion of development. People now aspire to public offices largely, primarily, for what they can make out of it instead of public service or the public good that can be delivered. So in the face of all these constraints, the possibility, there is a limited possibility of true democracy in our country unless we change certain things. First, we need to change the paradigm of governance. We also need to ensure that our institutions are becoming more efficient. I alluded to it earlier that they are inefficient. Again, we must ensure that our state, the Nigerian state, becomes legitimate in the eyes of the people. I told you that the state is an offspring of the colonial state. And all the negative characteristics that the colonial state had are now reproduced in the new colonial state. And people relate to the state not as a friend, not as their own, but as an enemy. If there's any opportunity to cheat Nigeria, people want to do it because they don't see it as their own. So we must create a situation where that relationship between the people and the state will change, and people will see the state as their own and not as. Unfortunately, the Nigerian state is an orphan. The political elite dislike it, and the people distrust it. None of us trust the state. When they come with a policy, people say, these people, nobody say they want cheat also. And let me make this point. If you look around today, I'm trying to come up with an idea why I said the state has become an orphan. The Nigerian state does not have anybody defending it against bad laws, against bad behavior of those who are saddled with the responsibility of presiding over state affairs. That is an endangered state. When political appointments are made, somebody out of nowhere becomes the head of an agency. He doesn't go through any training. Hardly will background checks be conducted. And he gets into office and just makes laws. And thankfully, the chairman of the Nigerian Civil Service, Federal Civil Service Commission is here, Professor Akoka. He knows what I'm talking about. So nobody is defending the state, protecting it. For instance, government sometimes make mistake of making bad laws. I don't know whether you agree with me. There are laws that lawyers would describe as bad laws. But who defend the state and protects it, calls attention to those bad laws so that they can be self-correcting? None. There is no agency that does that. You will have a DG who produces his own regulations. Nobody checks him. So the state in Nigeria has become an orphan. This is what I'm trying to say. So we need to change governance paradigm, but more importantly, one sine qua non for the institutionalization of democracy in Nigeria is the enthronement of a visionary leadership that will serve as the catalyst for the entrenchment of inclusive governance. And that is where we must concentrate. Because we need a leadership that has a strong ethical foundation. Ethics has disappeared from our polities and from governance. And we must restore ethics for us to be able to strengthen our democracy. And why am I saying that? If you look at the political class, for example, everybody does what he likes. I have said it before. The only place where you seek for a job and you don't need any serious certificate is politics. To be a messenger, they will ask you for a certain certificate. The only thing that the Constitution requests for you to occupy a political office is SCUSAT fail. I'm not saying SCUSAT. You just attempt it. Just produce evidence that you sat for SCUSAT, you can contest for governorship. That is the only profession, the only vocation in the country that requires the least qualification. Now, and those are the people that make decisions that are expected to drive the progress of the country. But it is in politics that you lower the bar. And that is the tragedy that we have. This explains why our politics assumes the character of warfare, because their lives depend on it. They don't have what you call a second address. So it's, like Obasanjo once said, a do or die affair. Secondly, this has increased the premium placed on violence as the main instrument of effecting change. There's a higher premium on violence as the instrument of change. There is also the problem that, like I said, the elite dislike the state and the poor distrust it. So all of these are problems which confront our state. The worsening security situation is also part of the crisis that we are facing. I don't want to waste our time, so let me quickly run through a few of the things that I need to say. So what should be our response to this? I think first of all, we need to take steps, like I said, to enhance state legitimacy, making the state now legitimate and acceptable to the people. And the state can only become acceptable to the people when it delivers the public goods. Then it will be possible for the people to relate to it as a friendly institution. In doing that, we must establish what I call an institutional order, meaning that our institutions must become stronger, must become efficient, must become legitimate. When your institutions are not legitimate and they are inefficient, it affects the progress of democracy in your country. Democracy, again, must not just be the textbook manual produced in Europe and imported into our country. We must relate our democracy to our own cultural experience. And what am I saying? Democracy applied to our cultural and local circumstance is a sure way of creating an economically stable, societally just, and politically vibrant nation. What I'm advocating is that if you look at the problem of Africa, they are political, they are economic, they are cultural. So the solution must also be political, must be economic, must be social, must be cultural. We have a lot to learn from our traditional practice of democracy in Africa, because Africans hate authoritarianism. When you look at a lot of countries, in the Nigerian experience, look at Igbo village democracy, look at Oyo Empire, where you have the monarch, but it's assisted by the people you call Oyomesi, those 7 chiefs that are meant to checkmate the excesses of his power. You have it in Kenya among the Kikuyu, you have it in Somaliland, you have it in Ethiopia, all of these across the African continent. The authority of the ruler in the African context resides in the midst of the community and the consent of the people. Even if you are an Oba, the day the people say they are fed up with you, that is the end. So the Oba also consciously cultivates the support of the people by making them to participate actively in governance within that community. So we must also restructure the modalities for intergroup relations and practice what I call true federalism. And what do I mean by that? We must have a federalism that recognizes the different layers of authority as propounded by Casey Ware, for example, where you have the regional government, then you have the component unit like we have at the level of the state here. They must have powers that are coordinate and independent of each other. Even though they interact, there is what you call intergovernmental relations, but they must be able to have some autonomy, one from the other. Government needs to do more to stamp out insecurity. I'm happy with what happened this week. I think a lot can still be done to end the phenomenon of either insurgency or kidnapping or banditry. I hate to use the word bandit. And thankfully, the National Assembly has now also discontinued the usage of the word bandit. Because if somebody captures, occupies an entire village, takes all the property of the people there, and even take some of them away to be sold into slavery, how do you call that banditry? A bandit is just like a petty thief who goes in, steal a few things and leaves. This one carry AK-47. What is it that terrorists are doing that bandits are not doing? Yorubas will say, Adienje Agbado, Onjokuta, Omuomisi, Olohun Oleyin. Àwọn tó wá lẹ́yìn kí ni wọ́n jẹ? If you say that banditry is not terrorism, what is it that bandits are doing, terrorists are doing that bandits are not doing? So let's give them the proper nomenclature and let that be. Again, I think some of the things we need to do is that we need to focus on the economy more. For an economy to support a proper democratic system, it must be characterized by a few things. And I want you to take note of this. It must have what you call reduced prices, increased income, enhanced economic equity, and the guarantee of public safety. Those 4 elements are important. I've said reduced prices, increased incomes, enhanced economic equity, and the guarantee of public safety. Without this, democracy will be in turbulence. If you have ever experienced turbulence in an aircraft, you know what that means. Again, there is, as I said before, we need to step up the issue of public enlightenment that will encourage the people to take their citizenship responsibility seriously. One of the problems that faces our democracy is that our people are not asking questions. For a democracy to survive, people must cultivate the habit of when they see something, they do what? Say something. They not only say something, they do what? They do something. So when you see something, say something, and then do something. Unless we change Nigeria from a situation where we just sit down, look, things will continue to go down south, and we must work towards an electoral system that ensures that the elections are truly competitive, and also such elections, the outcome of them are uncertain, ex ante. I am saying that in any democracy, the outcome of an election must not be known. Any situation where you know the outcome, that's working to the answer. So there must be uncertainty of outcomes as a defining characteristic of a proper electoral system. So everybody struggles to go ahead of the others. These are situations that we need to put back in place. But what has been the problem with us? We have had the problem of low level of political literacy, political apathy, and of course, the demonization of politics. What do I mean by that? Don't check your time. I saw Chairman checking his time because I've been here for like 3 hours. So, so part of the problem we have is that democracy is being progressively demonized and denigrated. So we must put a stop. People believe that those who go into politics, you want to go into politics? Except those who want to make money anyway, they don't see it as a profession for gentlemen. Because people, by their attitude and action, are denigrating politics. These are some of the problems. And that is why you have deficiencies in the politics that we play and in our democracy as we have it for now. As I said before, there is need for a new political reorientation. The absence of a robust civic education and the decline of value-based socialization have further weakened the moral foundation upon which democratic participation rests. This situation reflects what I choose to call the deficiency of normative civic behavior, a widespread failure to internalize the social norms of accountability, of tolerance, and respect for rule of law that sustain democratic system in other climes. So we must move from a situation where our system is characterized by weak institutions, corrupt practices, electoral manipulation, ethno-religious polarization, insecurity, eroded civic norms. All of these constitute what I call the structural and behavioral bottlenecks that continue to hinder Nigeria's transition from a procedural to a substantive democracy. Now, what are the lessons that we have to learn from other lands? I choose a few examples. Ordinary Ghana here reflects a system that has a lot of transparency. Electorally speaking, there's a large measure of transparency in the Ghanaian electoral process. What is even more important, their judiciary is largely independent. Furthermore, you have a citizenry that is active and alive to its responsibility. So there is very effective civic engagement in Ghana. We also have widespread civic education. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are absent here. Even our political parties, because of their preoccupation and intoxication with power, they abandon the non-power aspects of politics. And what do I mean by the non-power aspect? Public education, civic education, voter education. How many political parties does it? How many of them do it? None. You don't see on TV parties talking about what elections are about, how you should conduct yourself during elections, what is the role of the citizen. They have left that to Yaga Africa. They have abandoned the field to Yaga Africa. So we need to go back to that system. That system works in a country like Ghana. The second example that I want to point out there is that beyond the institutional design of the system, the vigilant participation of civil society and widespread civic education have nurtured a culture of accountability and tolerance, which reinforce the legitimacy of democratic institutions in Ghana. Now, South Africa, you know, they had the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that enabled them to confront past injustices. They were able to promote social healing, and they were able to foster inclusion. We need to do that so that you can have a framework for legal accountability, and people can benefit from mechanisms that address historical grievances. And then that will restore hope and trust in government. Now, the other experience is in India. India, they have a system that is known as Panchayati Raj, which is a system of devolution of power from the center to the local government and communities. That system is important because India's constitutional design devolves power to those states and local government, empowering communities through systems that I mentioned about, which facilitate grassroots governance and local decision making. Not only that, let me give another example. In Brazil, Brazil has what they call clean record law, lei da ficha limpa. I don't speak Portuguese, so I may not pronounce it well. Lei da ficha limpa. That is the clean record law. What does that law do? It engages in what you call pre-election vetting of potential participants in the electoral process. Our own, when somebody becomes governor, then someone will come up and say he forged the certificate after the fact. In Brazil, it is not possible because every participant has to be vetted before he goes to the ballot. The clean record law in Brazil disqualifies individuals convicted of corruption or other offenses from standing for public office for a fixed period, thereby improving the moral baseline of candidacy. The clean record law is there in Brazil. In fact, what they did is that they made it retroactive. Before the law was made, if you had been guilty of corruption, you'd be caught in the web. But you can count, it's hardly possible to have one or two state governors that doesn't have problem of corruption in Nigeria of today. How did they come to contest? All the file in the EFCC will be kept aside in the cooler while they rule and they govern. Then after they have spent 8 years, EFCC will now do theatrics and invite them to the office. And after about 2 weeks, the man will get a bail, and that the state dies, the thing dies, until he now wants to contest for another thing, maybe Senate. Now, in Bhutan, which lies between China and India, what do we have there? Constitution requires candidates to disclose their assets. We disclose assets when we have assumed office after the fact. Indeed, what our people do is that they do anticipatory declaration of assets. They will think of how much asset they will acquire when they get into office. So they put it in the record so that by the time they steal enough money to measure up to the standard they had built for themselves, the two are for. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So in Bhutan, Constitution requires that you disclose your asset, your qualification, your past criminal status, your personal data before you stand for elections. Anybody convicted in arrears or otherwise is disqualified or barred. This mechanism helps ensure that the field of political competition is not simply open, but is also governed by minimum standards of integrity and competence. We are below minimum standards. I am not even sure we have any standard. Now, and if you look at the Nordic society, Norway, Sweden, and all of it, in all of this society, you have robust institutions, comprehensive civic education, inclusive social welfare policies, all of which promote not just equal access to opportunity, but access to equal opportunities. There are two different things. Equal access to opportunities and access to equal opportunities. That exists in the Nordic countries. And what it does, it reinforces public trust and makes citizens feel invested in governance. For Nigeria, the lesson is clear. And what is that lesson? Democracy is more than institutions alone. It thrives where citizens trust those institutions, where they perceive fairness in governance, and where they internalize normative civic values such as tolerance, integrity, and respect for the rule of law. Together, all of these things will enable us to have strong institutions, to have engaged citizens, but also systems that will ensure that we have candidates with integrity in the system, inclusive governance, and normative civic culture. So the key takeaway is that we need to engage in reforms that will address structural weaknesses, enhance the quality of candidates that compete for office, and cultivate normative behavior in the country. If we are to move from what I call a procedural democracy towards what I also call substantive democratic experience. So these provide, I move to the penultimate section, which is prospect for the future. As I've said before, we can strengthen our institution. We must reform our political parties. What we have now are just special purpose vehicles for acquiring political power. They are not disciplined. There is no internal democracy in the parties. They are not even disciplined. They engage in disagreement on the pages of newspapers, on television. That's not a sign of people that are disciplined. Even in your social club, do you go to the media to go and abuse yourselves? It's only in the Nigerian political party that you have that. We need to install or reinstate discipline into the political parties. Again, we must uphold accountability and social trust and ensure that the deficit in normative civic behavior and political culture are corrected. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, let me say that there is an important point I need to make. We need to rebuild public trust in our system, in our institutions. We need to internalize those norms that I made reference to. We need electoral reform. The use of technology is already with us, but we need to continue to expand on that. We need an impartial judiciary. We also need quick dispensation of justice. Because part of the problem with our democracy is that we do not have a robust and timely dispute resolution mechanism or expeditious conclusion and determination of election cases. They drag on for too long. This needs to be improved. We must insulate our institutions from political interference, such as INEC, the judiciary, the ICPC, the AFCC, and all of them. We must also encourage our civil society to become more active. We need more advocacy groups, more independent media, more investigative journalists. We must also harness the energy of youth. It is said that by 2035, the largest concentration of young people will be in Africa. And since 1 out of 4 black people is a Nigerian, that means the largest concentration of young people will be in Nigeria in 2035. Are we preparing for them? We need to harness their energies to be able to support the democratic project. Our security must be reformed, rely more on intelligence. That is, everything about security must be more intelligence-driven. And the practice of community policing, which government has promised for too long, must become entrenched. That is the only way we can get out of the quagmire in which we have found ourselves. And there is need also for national integration. The requisite normative behavior that I talked about will include civic virtue and tolerance, will include accountability and integrity, participation and vigilance, democratic patriotism, which privileges national loyalty above ethnic, regional, or religious affiliations. This is very, very important. Ultimately, for our democracy to flourish, please, I want you to take note of this. It must evolve from a transactional system where power and resources are exchanged for loyalty into a community bound by shared values, ethical leadership, and mutual accountability. Only then can we talk about democracy taking hold in Nigeria and our having what I called substantive democracy. I would like to conclude by saying that all of us have a role to play. What the individual does in any system matters. If you think because you are just one person, you cannot do anything, you are deceiving yourself. In our homes, in our churches, in our mosques, we must also exhibit democratic attitude. It's not just for politicians alone. In your relationship with your children, you must be democratic. That's how democracy takes root. If you are an autocrat in the home, you cannot expect that when you get into public office, you become a Democrat. A man that says his wife must kneel down before he gives him food, who will see himself as a kabiesi. How does he see a woman in his office? These are attitudes that we need to imbibe in order to strengthen our democracy. We must now begin to focus on our leadership in recruitment process with a view to producing a new generation of leaders with ideas and vision that can strengthen our democracy and bring development to our people. My problem is that I don't think from the current crop of leaders, especially our political class, they see vision. And the reason why they don't see vision is that they don't sleep. You know, they don't sleep in the night. All political meetings are held at night. All political meetings are held. So people don't sleep at night. How can they dream dreams? Because if you are sleeping in the office, maybe you are just taking a nap. What dream do you want to have? It's when you sleep well that you can dream dreams. So we must now begin to focus on that kind of leadership. From all indications, the Nigerian elite seem to have run out of ideas. And as Claude Ake says, of even bad ones. That even bad ideas, they have run out of it. The political elite have demonstrated the lack of capacity to move the country forward by its own vision. It is even now almost incapable of protecting its own future and that of the country. I have never seen any other ruling class in the world that cares very little about its own future, like the Nigerian political elite. I mean, when you take security lightly, and you are saying they should pardon, they should recruit repentant bandits and terrorists into the army and all of this. What kind of person is that? Now, they are part of the people that are suffering. Many of them are locked up in Abuja. They can't go to their villages. Can you see the irony? Members of the political class cannot go to their villages either because of bad roads or because of terrorists and kidnappers, while their colleagues in other societies are going into the moon. Indeed, Elon Musk was saying that we should leave this earth and go to Mars. He was advocating it this week or last week. So people can't go to their villages. How can they get to Mars? So the only thing that this elite have done successfully is to exploit parochial concerns and loyalties instead of bridging our differences. Instead of bridging those differences, they have hardened them. More importantly, the circumstance which render it incapable of remaining coherent still remain. It has not changed. And as Ake predicted, and I hope this prediction does not come true, it will continue to accumulate by means of state power, pushing the premium on political power even higher and making political competition destructively intense. There must therefore be a conscious effort to put in leadership positions people with strong ethical foundation and high moral standard. A culture of integrity cannot be enthroned without an ethical leadership which must cut across both the public and private sector. You can't have a culture of integrity when there's an absence of ethical leadership. I'm of the firm belief, though, that it is possible to identify leaders who possess high standards of integrity, honesty, and transparency in Nigeria. I'm not saying they don't exist. The problem is they don't go for them. In this task, we as followers, we have a role to play. We must make up our mind from this particular lecture about the kind of society that we want and the type of leadership that we want to vote into office during elections. We must come up with a new set of social norms which are hinged on values in our cultural environment that can promote democratic attitude. This we can achieve through public discourse, through media campaigns, through training and retraining, and through the restructuring of the school curriculum to reflect teachings about democracy so that we can inculcate into our youth democratic attitudes. Finally, democracy in Nigeria is not a fixed destination. It is not a project. It is a process of self-correction. And this is the message of hope that I'm giving us. Democracy is not a finished matter. It is a process. It can be self-correcting. It can also evolve in terms of its morality. In consolidation, its consolidation depends on the simultaneous cultivation of strong institutions. I said that in the course of the lecture. Credible electoral systems, accountable leaderships, active citizen participation, and normative civic behavior. I believe that all of these are essential for a new order, a new dawn of democracy in Nigeria. And in this task, all of us have a role to play. I thank you for your attention.
Let's be seated. Please, can we give Prof a round of applause? That has been a very good lecture. Prof, thank you so much. And we have a lot of takeaways from your lecture. At least, I believe that everything will be able to put in our mind. Prof is telling us that people having democratic attitudes, and there's need for us to have a good ethical foundation can never give us any good democratic results. And later, I also made mention of how to deepen democracy in Nigeria. The Prof is able to tell us there's need for us to strengthen institutions, ensure the independence of judiciary and anti-corruption agencies, which Prof himself has been the former provost. He also talked about enhances this integrity, transparent voting system, and strong enforcement of electoral laws. He further mentioned about issue of inclusive government, governance, that is, ensure that people are not marginalized, and that we need to build a political culture that we should then encourage internal party democracy. And in conclusion, Prof is able to tell us that Nigerian democracy is at crossroads, while significant constraints persist, but notwithstanding, there are still future and hope for us that if institutions, whether government can come out, the government can come out with a good institutional framework, the future of Nigerian democracy depends on the nation's commitment to reforms and the implementation. The leadership must have integrity, the leadership with ethical foundation, with integrity, and with fairness would definitely give us a very good democracy. So I think on this note, we need to give Prof a very good round of applause for that, Prof. On behalf of the management, thank you so much for this. Do you have any just 2 contributions, please, because of time? Okay.
Chairman, all the protocol observed. I thank God for Professor Babawale because he has brought a very, very important topic and he has dealt wonderfully with it. It's done excellently. I'm really very thrilled. And this is not a surprise. He's from Ife. And quite a number of us are from Ife. In 1964, when Professor Jose was recruiting people for Ife, I was then a student in UK. He came round. He said, we need quite a number of people. And I was drawn into getting to Ife a few months thereafter, in 65. Now, let me say something. The question you want to ask yourself, are you really independent in Nigeria? In 1960, when Nigeria was supposed to be having independence, please mark my word, supposed to be having independence, there were fewer than 1,500 students at the University College Ibadan. It was not a university then. It was under London with Professor Parry as principal, not even vice chancellor. And the number of girls, the number of ladies, fewer than 80, about 80, well, 80 something. That's all. For Nigeria that extends from Lagos to Cameroon, Kano, Sokoto, and all. So how do you expect people to have that thought-provoking lecture that Professor Babawale has given? But I thank God that those of us who have ventured into teaching, lecturing, they call it teaching, not only to teach, have tried to condition Nigerians so that they can think in the way Professor Babawale has thought. I thank God. Now, going from 1,500 students in 1960, I can tell you authoritatively, we were not up to 1,500 in 1960. Now, looking at the graduation list of Leeds City University alone, 2,000 for one university, and we have about how many universities in the country? So highly intelligent people are emerging, and I thank God for that. And I'm happy to have participated in the setting up of 3 universities in this country. University of Ife was a tropical forest. Ado-Ekiti, it was also a tropical forest under Ladapo. And of course here, with the gentleman. So I threw the question, have we really independent? And I will say we are practically not so. Because if you look outside, which of the cars we are using are made in Nigeria? If you want spare parts, where do you get them from? Simple battery is not available. Simple valve to close the end of tires, not even the tires, they are not available. She imported ni, she kinini, that's what. Power is not available. We are not thinking right, and that is the trouble we have. The Bible says something that when the foundation is bad, what can the righteous do? We have been conditioned to a situation where we do not really have independence. Independence comes to us when we are able to use our resources for the benefits of the society, for the benefits of the children of the populace, and use it rightly. Then we really have independence. We depend entirely, almost 95%, on importation of finished goods, and so people will come to us for raw materials. Let me run through quite quickly. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. One, the largest copper producing place on earth is from Africa. Largest production of gold, Africa. Largest production of lithium, Africa. Largest production of gas, Africa. We have gas in Nigeria, which is being flared off. Now, what we need to do is to ensure that people are educated the way you are being educated and to think right. And then when we start applying those things correctly to our lives, then it will be easier for us to set up what we have as independence. The people are always waiting for us at EEC, at Europe, America. Oh, they are coming to crawl and beg us, and we will give them this. We rely on this. Oh, $1 is 2,000, some £1 is this. That's what we live on, and we do not have independence. So if we do not have independence, how can we have democracy? You see, you have given a very brilliant lecture, and I'm very happy about it. And what I'm going to leave our students, I'm sorry many of them are not here, they should be here, that the purpose of some of us staying in education is really to educate you so that you can think right. When you think right, you will have democracy. What we are doing, we are scrambling for portions, scrambling for scraps. We are scrambling for crunches that are coming from European and American table. So think about these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Now, thank you. Now, the registrar, please help us to appreciate the guest lecturer for today.
So on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, Chairman of Senate, and the entire management, staff of Leeds City University, I want to say thank you so much for the thought-provoking lecture delivered today. I have a token for you.
Can we rise on our feet for the anthems, please? Let us rise up on for the anthems.
University, the cradle of great leaders, where hopes and dreams are given life and drive for great attainment, with motivation and inspiration. We're dedicated, educated, standing peace and love. From different cultures, beautiful pictures, Lee City University. We are the leaders, the light of our great nation, diversified yet one great vision, with knowledge for self-reliance and wisdom to serve our fatherland. We're dedicated, educated, standing peace and love. Our voices together, beautiful harmony. Lee City University, Lee City University, Lee City University.
Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians old and proud to serve our sovereign fatherland.
Thank you very much. We have a large refreshment for our guests at the back of the hall. Please, guests, please proceed to the back of the hall for a large refreshment.